Good evening YouTube, my name's Sean Connors and welcome back to Outsiders. Tonight I'm going to be taking a mailbag programme question from one of my subscribers. You will have noticed recent times I haven't been doing many mailbag programmes, and I did say this before, there is a reason. A lot of the questions I do get asked are actually already within the videos I've done. I'm not going to cover over old ground. What I want to try and do with each mailbag programme is cover something new, and that's why I set the challenge out there that if people want to give me a question, I'll answer it for you or direct you onto a way to answer it, but to really get a video response, it's got to be something special. And then one person has managed to do that recently and I think deserves a video response, and that's somebody called Vorax Transilarius, who asked the question about quantifying what a retro roleplay game is. Now, I can see why he's had problems getting a definitive answer on this. It isn't easy to do. It's very difficult because there are a lot of misnomers about it, and there's a lot of problems because there are a lot of retro systems that have been re-released. So you wonder in your own mind, what is a retro system? So I think the first thing to do is forget about all the re-releases, take it right back to its roots. Think about early edition games. I mean, for D&D you could go back to what they call the white box rules, but most people will remember the red box. And there are various editions like that, first edition games, you know, whether it be Empire of the Petal Throne is a game that was around about the same time as D&D, came out pretty close to it, but didn't have the appeal that D&D had, so faded away. But it's certainly very retro. And there are many others. I mean, the original Warhammer game came out much later. You're talking first edition 80, 81, I believe. And that was a very retro style feel game. But still, it had some uniquities about it, but I'd still classify it as retro. And let me see why I would classify some of these games as retro. There are two quantifying differences between most of the old school games. The first one is that they have a lot of rules covered, but there are a lot of grey areas. Now, grey areas effectively are where the rules don't cover it, and you as a DM have to determine what happens. Now, I do, like a lot of DMs on the community, we look back with a fondness on retro gaming, and a number of them are currently going back to that fondness by picking up sort of rehashed, if you like, or slight updates of the old games, and they are still retro because they don't cover all the rules. They're not using the second part of the equation, which is they're not tactical. It's much more toe-to-toe, which is the second point I'm coming to. Retro really does not have that. It has a much more abstract feel to it, and that's another quality that they certainly possess. So rather than have a tactical grid, which is if you take 3rd edition D&D, 3.5, 4th edition, all that sort of thing, it's all about miniatures and a battle map and stuff like that. In many ways, when I look back, I remember that as a DM, when I was doing my early D&D games, we would often use tiles to create the feel of it, and people put figures on, and that's how we carried out it was still abstract, but it sort of worked quite well. So I suppose it was the basics before what comes later, the battle board and all the various feats and everything else that add on to that. So fundamentally, those are the two different. So it's most of the modern systems have complete rules that pretty much cover everything. The old ones don't. And the other thing the modern games has is a very tactical feel to it. I don't mind either direction, to be perfectly honest with you. I can see the appeal of the more modern games as well as the retro games. But one thing I know as a DM is that you have to move with the times. It's no good me getting stuck in a rut that's my favourite system, that's all I'll ever do. Because if I did that, then my players, who have been very loyal to me over the years, I probably would have lost more players by not having a more adaptable approach as a DM, because it's not just about my love of the game, it's theirs. And to attract new players, you often have to think in terms of the more modern games, because that's the ones that they know. They don't know the past versions. Why would they? So you have to think in those terms. And if you think in our hobby, what our hobby is all about, it is always about adapting to what comes next. There is going to be a lot of challenges on pen and paper. There already is a lot of challenges on pen and paper, probably in the next 10 to 15 years. I mean, if you just think about what's happened really over the last 15 to 20 years in the world in terms of technology, you only have to think, where will we be in 10 years, 15, 20 years' time? And you must realise that there will come a fundamental shift and change in the pen and paper industry. It's not there yet, but it must come. So as DMs, we have to adapt, adopt and change our approach to find new players, keep old players, and appease everybody. And that's a very difficult approach, but that makes this question particularly apt. So I hope I've done it in a very simple way justice to explain the differences, in my view, between retro style games and modern games. But in essence, really, it's very difficult to quantify because people are now tagging systems that have just come out with the retro feel to them. They're not really retro, so that's something they are retro, but they're not retro because they weren't released at the very beginning, and that's something to be aware of. But they will have that sort of very simplistic, not all the rules are covered feel, and if that's what somebody wants to go for, that I think it's great. And that's really where we are with the retro rules system. I don't think there's any point rehashing any more questions on it, but I just wanted to give you my take as I believe an experienced RPG veteran of the field, and also just because it was such a good question, really come back with you with hopefully quantifiable quality video that will do justice to your question and hopefully your quest for what it is that you're looking for in terms of yourself. I would say you've got to experience everything as a DM to fully appreciate what is available. I don't think you can just have one style. I think you've got to have many. I think you have to be as adaptable as you can be because the future of our hobby requires us to be. And even YouTube is a fantastic addition of things that we have done to bring the community closer in a strange way because we don't know each other, but brought ourselves closer. And at the same time, that closeness is now sharing things and we're cooperating and developing things as an industry and a community. And that's the future of RPGs, because as the technology gets better and we can bring people into it and create the visualizations that we as DMs have, then the future of this hobby is very, very safe. So as it is, I'll leave you with the retro feel, old school rules, it probably is reels, and hope that that has done justice for Axe to your question. Anyway, thank you very much for your time. Till the next time, take care of yourselves and each other. Happy gaming. Bye-bye.